Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In a world where time flowed like a river, twisted and unpredictable, there existed a wizard named Rast. The ancient tomes spoke of time as a force both feared and revered, and Rast was one of the few who dared to explore its deepest secrets. He had spent his life seeking the wisdom buried within forgotten texts, delving into the arcane, pushing the boundaries of magic to their very limits. And now, as he stood in the dusty shadows of a long-abandoned library, high in the mountains, he felt he was on the verge of a breakthrough. The library was a labyrinth of knowledge, with shelves stretching endlessly into the darkness, filled with books that had not been touched by human hands for centuries. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment and ancient dust, and the only sound was the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth, its flames casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. In the center of the room, atop a pedestal of black marble, lay the object of Rast's obsession, an ancient tome bound in cracked leather that was as dark as the night sky. Rast approached it with reverence, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the book he had searched for his entire life. It was said to contain the secrets of time itself, magic that could bend, twist, and even reverse the flow of time. With trembling hands, he opened the tome, its pages crackling like dry leaves in the wind. The words were written in a language long forgotten by the world, but Rast's knowledge of the arcane allowed him to decipher the text. His eyes scanned the intricate script, and as he read, a sense of awe washed over him. The magic described within was beyond anything he had ever imagined. It was powerful, dangerous, and forbidden. But Rast was not deterred. He had a reason, a purpose that drove him forward despite the risks. He wanted to change the past, to undo the greatest mistake of his life, a mistake that had cost him everything he held dear. Years ago, Rast had lost his family in a tragic accident. It was a day that haunted him, a wound that time had never healed. The memory of that day was etched into his soul, a constant reminder of his failure. He had devoted himself to the study of magic in the hope that one day he could find a way to make things right. And now, as he stood before the ancient tome, he believed he had found the answer. The spell was complex, requiring not just knowledge but an understanding of the very nature of time. It was not merely about reversing the flow of time, it was about manipulating it, bending it to his will. Rast spent days studying the spell, deciphering its every nuance, preparing himself for the moment when he would cast it. He knew the risks were great, but the potential reward was worth it. Finally, the day came. Rast stood in the center of a circle drawn with ancient symbols, each one glowing faintly with the power he had imbued into them. The tome lay open before him, the words of the spell etched into his mind. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and began to chant the incantation. The air around him crackled with energy, and he felt the fabric of reality begin to shift. The room grew darker, the flames in the hearth flickering wildly as the magic took hold, but something was wrong. As Rast reached the final words of the incantation, he felt a sudden pull, a force dragging him away from the present. He tried to resist, to maintain control, but it was too late. The world around him dissolved into a swirl of light and darkness, and he felt himself being sucked into the very fabric of time itself. When the world solidified around him once more, Rast found himself standing in the same room, but something was different. The fire in the hearth was burning just as it had been, the ancient tome still lay open before him, but there was an eerie stillness in the air. He glanced at the hourglass on the table, and his heart skipped a beat. The sand was flowing upward. Rast realized with a shock that the spell had not worked as he had intended. Instead of reversing time, he had trapped himself in a loop, a never-ending cycle where time reset itself every day. The horror of the realization gripped him, but there was no time to dwell on it. The day reset, and everything returned to its original state over and over again. Rast relived the same day, each time searching for a way out of the loop. At first, he tried to replicate the spell, hoping to undo the mistake he had made, but every attempt only reset the day once more. Frustration grew into desperation as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Rast was trapped in a prison of his own making, and he began to fear he would never escape, but as the days passed, Rast began to notice something strange. Each time the day reset, small things changed. The color of the sky, the pattern of the flames in the hearth, even the texture of the ancient tome's pages, all were slightly different with each loop. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but as the changes became more pronounced, he realized that they were real. The loop was not as fixed as it seemed. Driven by this realization, Rast began to experiment. He tried different actions, testing the limits of the loop. He discovered that while certain events were fixed, like the position of the hourglass, others were malleable. The choices he made, the emotions he felt, all had an impact on the loop. The more he experimented, the more he began to understand the true nature of time. Rast's understanding of time shifted from viewing it as a linear, unchangeable force to something more fluid, interconnected with the very essence of existence. He began to see that time was not just a sequence of events, but a reflection of the emotions and intentions of those who lived within it. Each loop was a new opportunity to explore this understanding, to push the boundaries of what he could change, but with this newfound understanding came a deep internal struggle. Rast's obsession with controlling time had been driven by his grief, by a desire to change the past and undo his mistakes. But now, he began to question whether his motives were pure, whether he was seeking to manipulate time for the right reasons. The weight of his past mistakes, combined with the fear of eternal entrapment, began to take its toll. In one iteration of the loop, as Rast stood before the ancient tome, he noticed something he had never seen before. A faint outline, a shadow on the page that had not been there in previous loops. He reached out to touch it, and as his fingers brushed the surface of the page, the shadow shifted, taking form before his eyes. It was a figure, an older version of himself. The older Rast looked at him with a mixture of pity and understanding. "You are lost," the figure said, its voice echoing softly in the stillness of the room. "Lost in the flow of time, just as I was." "Who are you?" Rast asked, though deep down he already knew the answer. "I am you," the figure replied. "Or rather, I was you. Trapped in the same loop, seeking the same answers. But the answers you seek are not in this book, nor in the magic you wield." "Then where?" Rast demanded, his frustration boiling over. "How do I break free?" The figure smiled sadly. "Time is not something to be controlled, but something to be understood. It is not the past you need to change, but yourself." The word struck Rast like a blow. All his life, he had sought to control time, to bend it to his will. But now, as he looked into the eyes of his older self, he realized that his approach had been flawed from the beginning. Time was not an enemy to be conquered, but a river to be navigated. And the key to navigating it lay not in power, but in understanding. With this new understanding, Rast began to shift his focus. He stopped trying to reverse the flow of time and instead began to embrace it. He allowed himself to feel the emotions he had long buried: grief, sorrow, regret, but also joy, hope, and love. He began to see the time loop not as a prison, but as a reflection of his own inner turmoil. Each loop became an opportunity to explore these emotions, to understand them and, through them, to understand the flow of time itself. Rast discovered that the loop responded to his emotional state, that the more he embraced his emotions, the more the loop began to unravel. The changes he made were subtle at first, but as he continued to explore, they became more pronounced. Rast realized that the key to breaking the loop lay not in mastering time, but in mastering himself. The loop was a manifestation of his unresolved emotions, of his desire to change the past without accepting the present. The more he understood this, the closer he came to breaking free. The turning point came in a moment of profound clarity. Rast stood before the hourglass, watching as the sand flowed upward, and for the first time, he felt at peace. He no longer felt the need to change the past, no longer felt the burden of his mistakes. Instead, he focused on the present, on the here and now. In that moment, Rast understood that time was not a force to be controlled, but a reflection of the human experience. It was shaped by emotions, by relationships, by the choices people made every day. And just as he had the power to influence time, he also had the power to influence his own life. With this realization, Rast performed the spell one last time. But this time, it was not to reverse time, but to embrace the flow of it. As he chanted the incantation, he felt the magic course through him, not as a force to be wielded, but as a part of himself. The room around him shimmered, and for a moment, he felt the entire flow of time, past, present, and future, merge into one. And then, the loop broke. Rast found himself standing in the same room, but everything had changed. The fire in the hearth burned more brightly, the hourglass stood still, and the ancient tome lay closed on the pedestal. He was no longer trapped in the loop, he had finally broken free, but more importantly, Rast himself had changed. The journey through the loop had transformed him, not just in his understanding of time, but in his understanding of life. He no longer felt the need to change the past. Instead, he felt a deep sense of peace and acceptance. As Rast left the library, he looked out at the world with new eyes. The sky was a brighter shade of blue, the air was filled with the scent of fresh pine, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. The world around him had not changed, but his perception of it had. He no longer saw the world as a place of loss and regret, but as a place of endless possibilities. The memory of his family was still with him, but it no longer haunted him. Instead, it was a source of strength, a reminder of the love and joy he had shared with them. Rast knew that he could not change the past, but he could honor it by living fully in the present. As he walked down the mountain path, away from the library, Rast felt a sense of purpose and determination. He had learned the true nature of time, and with that knowledge came a new understanding of himself and the world around him. Rast knew that his journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new mysteries to explore, but he was ready for them. He had learned that time was not something to be feared or controlled, but something to be embraced. And with that knowledge, he felt ready to face whatever the future might bring. As he reached the base of the mountain, Rast looked back at the library one last time. It stood there, silent and ancient, a testament to the knowledge and wisdom it held within its walls. But Rast no longer felt the need to return. He had found the answers he had been seeking, not in the pages of an ancient tome, but within himself. With a final nod of gratitude, Rast turned away and continued down the path, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. He knew that time would continue to flow, just as it always had, but now he was no longer a prisoner of it. He was free. Rast moved away from the mountain, each step lighter than the last as he felt the weight of his past slowly lifting off his shoulders. The air was crisp and cool, filling his lungs with a refreshing clarity that mirrored the newfound peace within him. The path before him wound through dense forests and across bubbling streams, the landscape vibrant with life that he hadn't truly noticed in what felt like an eternity. The world, once a backdrop to his single-minded pursuit, now pulsed with a rhythm he was beginning to appreciate, something he hadn't done in years. As he walked, Rast found himself attuned to the subtle changes in the environment, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the ground. The sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, the distant rush of water, were no longer mere distractions but a symphony of existence. Rast realized how much he had missed in his relentless chase for control over time, how disconnected he had been from the world around him. The path eventually led him to a small village nestled in a valley, smoke curling from the chimneys of simple cottages. The sight was a familiar one, yet Rast felt as if he was seeing it for the first time. There was a simplicity to the village life that he found comforting. The people here lived in harmony with the flow of time, unburdened by the complexities that had once consumed him. They moved with purpose but without haste, their lives unfolding naturally, each moment flowing into the next. Rast entered the village, his presence met with nods and smiles from the villagers who recognized him. He had been here before, many times, but this time was different. The burden of his past no longer loomed over him, and he felt an openness in his interactions that had been absent before. He greeted the blacksmith, who was busy hammering out a new plow, and exchanged a few words with the baker, whose fresh bread filled the air with a mouth-watering aroma. These were simple interactions, yet they carried a weight of meaning that Rast hadn't appreciated before. He continued through the village until he reached the edge of a small lake, its surface like glass, reflecting the sky and the surrounding trees with perfect clarity. Rast stood at the water's edge, looking out at the calm expanse, and felt a deep sense of contentment. For the first time in years, he was at peace with where he was, no longer yearning to be elsewhere, no longer haunted by what could have been. The lake, with its stillness, mirrored his own state of mind, a tranquil acceptance of the present. As he stood there, Rast's thoughts drifted to the future. He had spent so much of his life fixated on the past, on what he had lost, that the idea of looking forward was foreign to him. But now, with the weight of his grief lifted, he found himself wondering what lay ahead. The world was full of possibilities, each day a new canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of experience. Rast knew that his journey was far from over, that there were still mysteries to explore, knowledge to gain, and perhaps even wrongs to right. But he no longer approached these challenges with a sense of desperation. Instead, he felt a quiet determination, a resolve to live each day fully, to embrace whatever came his way with an open heart. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village and the lake. Rast watched as the sky transitioned from blue to orange to deep purple, the colors reflecting off the water in a breathtaking display. It was a moment of perfect harmony, a reminder of the beauty that existed in the world when one took the time to notice it. Rast felt a deep gratitude for this moment, for the journey that had brought him here, for the lessons he had learned along the way. As the last light of day faded into night, Rast turned away from the lake and made his way back through the village. The cottages were now illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns, and the air was filled with the sounds of evening, laughter from inside the homes, the chirping of crickets, the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. Rast felt a sense of belonging here, among these simple people living their simple lives. He knew that he could stay, that he could find a place for himself in this village, living out his days in peace and contentment. But Rast also knew that his journey was not yet complete. There was still a part of him that longed to explore, to seek out the unknown, to push the boundaries of what was possible. The world was vast, and he had only seen a small part of it. There were other lands, other cultures, other forms of magic that he had yet to discover. And now, with a clear mind and an open heart, Rast felt ready to embark on this new adventure. The next morning, Rast left the village with the dawn, the sun rising behind him as he set out on the road that stretched toward the horizon. He carried with him only what he needed, leaving behind the trappings of his past life. The path ahead was uncertain, but Rast welcomed the uncertainty. He no longer sought to control the flow of time or to change the past. Instead, he was content to walk with time, to let it guide him to whatever lay ahead. As he traveled, Rast found himself encountering others on the road, travelers, merchants, wanderers, each with their own stories, their own experiences. He listened to their tales, shared his own, and found that each interaction enriched his understanding of the world. He learned that time was not just a force to be reckoned with, but a thread that connected all lives, weaving together the tapestry of existence. Rast began to see himself not as a master of time, but as a part of its intricate web, each moment a strand that added to the whole. The road led him through forests and fields, across rivers and mountains, each landscape offering its own challenges and rewards. Rast faced them all with a sense of purpose and clarity that he had never felt before. He no longer sought to bend the world to his will, but to move with it, to adapt and grow with each new experience. Along the way, he encountered others who were lost, just as he had been, and he found himself offering guidance, helping them find their own path. In doing so, Rast realized that he had found a new purpose, not in controlling time, but in helping others navigate it. The journey was long, and the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Rast's hair grew longer, his beard fuller, his once fine robes now worn and patched from the road. But with each step, he felt more alive, more connected to the world around him. The pain of his past still lingered, but it no longer defined him. It was a part of him, a scar that had healed but would never fully disappear. And that was okay. It was a reminder of where he had been, of the lessons he had learned, and of the strength he had gained from overcoming his struggles. One evening, as Rast sat by a campfire under a sky full of stars, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the ancient library, the time loop, the wisdom he had gained, and the peace he had found. He realized that his journey had not just been about breaking free from the loop, but about breaking free from the chains he had placed on himself. The chains of regret, of guilt, of a desire to control what could not be controlled. In letting go of those chains, Rast had found freedom, not just from the time loop, but from the burden of his past. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, Rast made a silent vow to himself. He would continue to walk the road before him, to seek out new experiences, to help others where he could, and to live each day with an open heart and a clear mind. He would no longer fear the flow of time or seek to control it. Instead, he would embrace it, live within it, and find peace in its steady, unending rhythm. The next morning, Rast rose with the sun, packed his belongings, and continued on his journey. The road stretched out before him, winding through the landscape, leading him toward the unknown. And Rast walked it with a sense of purpose, of peace, and of quiet joy. The past was behind him, the future lay ahead, and Rast was content to be exactly where he was, moving forward, one step at a time, in harmony with the flow of time.